Yes, we are getting political for the first time on our podcast.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was a political episode.
Oh, it was. It was all about politics.
See, we're just literally forgetting these.
Hello and welcome to A Century in Cinema. I'm Arthur.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we discuss a classic film from every year. This year, 1952, we're talking about High Noon from director Fred Zinnemann and starring Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly.
What's going on in 1952, Arthur?
Oh, I wanted to mention that listeners can find where to watch High Noon in our show notes, as always. I myself watched it on Amazon Prime.
Oh, I have a DVD.
All right. 1952. The first hydrogen bomb is tested by the United States this year, and the explosion is apocalyptically large. Makes the bombs used in World War II look tiny by comparison.
Where did they test it? Do you know?
The Marshall Islands in the Pacific.
Wow. R.I.P.
You hear people be like, far from any civilized place in the world. Well, you're like, well, people were living nearby and, there's ecology and stuff. But, okay. America is still bogged down in the Korean War, and Dwight D. Eisenhower is elected president. In general, the prosperity of the post-war years in the USA are still in full swing. Here's some stats for you, Andrew. 3 out of 5 families in America own a car. 1 in 3 homes have a television now.
There you go.
TV's a big thing. This is the first year of the Today Show.
Oh.
The first passenger jet is developed in Britain, paving the way for widespread commercial air travel in the coming years. And also, Britain tests their own atomic bomb, becoming the 3rd nuclear power after the Soviet Union, of course. This is also the year the Big Bang Theory is first proposed. The roll-on deodorant is invented, and the polio vaccine is developed.
Wow.
And of course, it's worth elaborating on the Red Scare going on in America. The U.S. Supreme Court upholds a law stating that communist teachers are to be banned from teaching in public schools. Cold War tension and fear of all things communist has some effects on the film industry too. Do you know who is banned from the United States this year, Andrew?
I guess I don't.
Charlie Chaplin, exiled from the country.
Oh, yes. I knew that he was. I didn't know it was this year.
Right.
Oh, and Limelight came out this year.
There's some good films coming out this year. Singing in the Rain.
I thought it was so interesting. Singing in the Rain comes out in 52. Just to think that, we've, on this podcast, covered that much time that now we have a film that's referencing how silent film died in a musical form.
Like, Singing in the Rain is a nostalgic look at the past 30 years of Hollywood, and they're kind of like, remember the good old days?
Yes. And it's sort of a reclaiming of it, too, by making, a fake good old days. On the Italian neo-realism front, Umberto D comes out this year, which is considered to be one of the masterpieces of that movement. Vittorio De Sica, same guy who directed Bicycle Thieves. Rossellini continues his departure with Europa 51, another Ingrid Bergman film. Really lovely movie. Very sad. This is the year Kurosawa directs The Men Who Tread on Tigers' Tails, which is, I think, one of his most underrated films. And, of course, his seminal classic, Ikiru. Fellini releases The White Sheik this year, which is a very funny movie. A lot of great movies coming out this year. One of my favorite short films of all time. It's a stop-motion animated film, technically. It's called Neighbors, and it's these 2 men fighting over this specific part of their backyard, and all of it is stop-motion animation through photography. It is so funny and quick and interesting, and it's so cool. That's a really fun little short. I think it's like 10 minutes, maybe less. But that's my more obscure recommendation.
I also see that The Flavor of Green Tea Over Rice from Japanese film director Yasujiro Ozu comes out, and we will get to him.
And Viva Zapata, which is Marlon Brando as a Mexican revolutionary. The reason that film's interesting to bring up is it's about a man who leads a rebellion against the dictatorship, and it was directed by Elia Kazan. He's just about to rat everybody out.
Yeah, we mentioned Kazan in our last podcast. Infamous but brilliant filmmaker.
Oh, and the iconic animated short Rabbit Seasoning, one of the all-time famous animated shorts featuring Elmer Fudd, Bugs Bunny, and Daffy Duck. It's one of those weird animated shorts that I just feel like everybody has seen. Like, even if you haven't ever sat down and watched it, we've all sort of just fused that short into our brains. You know what I'm talking about, though. Like, the one where Daffy's trying to get Elmer Fudd to kill Bugs Bunny, and, like, he keeps getting shot, and his duck bill at one point gets, like, flipped around to the back of his head and stuff. There's so much there's so many iconic images from that short.
Yeah, I remember that. Those are films.
Yep, those are all movies.
I think you got the plot this week. Do you think you got this one?
Oh yeah, I can do this.
Yeah, I think you got this.
High Noon is the story about Marshall Will Kane, played by Gary Cooper. It begins with him getting married to his wife, Amy, played by Grace Kelly. And as soon as they are married, it turns out that a band of mischiefs and thieves who he previously arrested and attempted to get the death penalty for have returned and are planning to hunt him down once their leader, Frank Miller, gets off the noon train. The noon train will be arriving in 80 minutes from the time the movie starts, and we follow for a very tense 80 minutes as Will Kane in real time tries to gather up a posse, fails at every attempt, and ends up eventually having to face the posse on his own. Through cunning, wit, and very strategic windows, he is able to take out the posse one by one. The town, who had turned their backs on him in his moment of need, are suddenly reinvigorated and see him as a hopeful icon. But instead of becoming that for them, he takes off his badge, stamps it into the ground, and walks away with his wife, never to return. This is a movie my dad showed me when I was a child, and I always loved it when I was a kid.
When I told my parents that I was watching this, the first thing that my mom said was, "Oh, your dad's seen that." And we mentioned...
It's a dad movie.
It's a dad movie, yeah.
It's a pro-communist dad movie. But we'll get more into that later. What did you think of this?
I really liked it. It was a strange experience watching this movie, because it's very straightforward. It's very simple. It just goes by really quickly. You don't get a lot from the characters. You don't get a lot from the situation. It's bad guys coming on the noon train. The marshal's got to get his posse together. He doesn't. He's got to fight him on his own. That's about it.
Yeah.
There's the music that plays throughout the film. The Ballad of High Noon, or Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling. If you watch this movie, it's going to get stuck in your head. Dmitry Tiomkin, a Russian, wrote the music. The lyrics were written by Ned Washington, and it's sung by Tex Ritter.
There you go.
So if you look up any of those names, they'll be associated with this song. And it starts the movie, it ends the movie, it's playing throughout the movie. It makes it feel like you're watching this piece of folklore, this story that's been passed around the American West, because it is so simple, right? It's so straightforward what's going on. It's got its morals. It's got a message, and even if you don't fully agree with it, you can tell it's there.
Yes.
It was really weird watching it, because it did encapsulate what I really like about American Westerns, and that is that they have a folklore element that seems to embody American culture and ideology. Love them or hate them, you get this insight into the psyche of the American spirit. And this film really seemed to encompass that.
Yeah.
You don't get all the flourishes of other Westerns. You don't get bogged down with the chases or anything like that. It is really about the message. and the moral characters.
It's sort of about the failure of democracy. And I don't think that the film itself is saying democracy is a failure or America is a failure. I think the film is saying at this point in time, our terror involved with Russians and with communism is weakening us. That's what the movie's about. I didn't really catch any of that when I was a kid. I actually always thought, in my head, I thought that Gary Cooper was supposed to somehow represent, like the all-American hero, and the town is supposed to represent these, dissidents, these people who aren't somehow in line. I don't know exactly what I thought. I was a child,
Yeah.
But I could always tell there was some sort of, metaphor going on. But yeah, watching it now as an adult, I was fully like, oh, this is like completely about the Red Scare and how people who are consumed with it are weakening the country as a whole because they can't think rationally. And then, of course, I started doing research on it for this podcast and was like, oh, it's like, it's not like a coincidence. Like, it is 100% about that. So I thought that was really interesting. This was a really nice revisit for me. I really like this movie. I think it has a great sense of tension and timing. Like you said, nothing really goes down until the final 10 minutes of the movie. But I've always thought that the first 2/3 of the movie were the best part. Meeting all the different townspeople, learning everyone's perspective, the complications between him and Helen, who is my favorite character in this piece by far. Helen Ramirez, played by Katy Jurado. Speaking of the music in this movie, did you notice that during her scenes, there's like this weird... it sounds like something you would hear in The Thief of Baghdad. It's like this weird, like, Middle Eastern-esque...
No, I definitely caught that, and I was like, what the hell is that?
They're like, yeah...
What is that film trying to tell me about this character?
This woman is from out of, she's not from America, so therefore it's got to be like the Middle East, even though she straight up says that she's from Mexico in this plot as well.
Yeah.
I just feel like for the dramatic stakes being set at that point in the film, it's inappropriate music. It does not fit at all. But that was like my only criticism at all about the whole movie. I really enjoyed revisiting it. I thought it was great. And it was a huge success.
That's weird to me that it took in a ton of money. Just, what is it? Last week we were talking about The Thing from Another World, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how sort of safe and by the numbers that felt, sort of in line with playing into the Red Scare, really. And then we come to this film, which is all an allegory for how the Red Scare and the blacklist in Hollywood is this huge moral failing. And then it's this huge success. Sweeps the Oscars.
I think your average American at this point isn't aware of Charles Foreman, who we're going to get to, or any of that drama behind the scenes. I think they're all seeing it as, he is the American hero and he's having to rise up against all of these other people to do what's right. He's a vigilante. Everyone's telling him to get out and he won't. He's like, I have to face these bad guys. So I think that a lot of people probably interpreted it that way. Not to mention Westerns were starting to get huge at this point. I mean, this was like the peak of their popularity. Well, not quite the peak. I mean, it's starting to calm down a little bit, but Westerns are a safe bet. Westerns are the comic book movies right now, Yeah,
speaking of vigilantes, parallels with the superhero genre today. That's funny.
So yeah, I mean, people are seeing this being advertised as this big Western, and it's going to be a big shootout, and that's drawing in people, and then, people actually go and see it. And I guess initial reactions were a little lukewarm because people thought it was a little boring, but then as people got more and more into it, I mean, it just started making so much money. People just really loved it.
So you mentioned that Westerns are really popular at this time. I am a little bit sad that I didn't find room for a Western earlier in our list of films throughout the century, because I do know it's been a big genre in Hollywood ever since the beginning. They've been making Westerns for a long, long time.
Oh, yeah, the early Nickelodeons and everything.
Yeah. And I mean, you have John Wayne, John Ford, all these big films coming through the system. And we just never got to it until now. And this film feels like more of a subversion of the genre, sort of a reversal of the expectations. So I don't know if I'm appreciating it as much as I would normally if I had been more accustomed to what Westerns were like up until this point. And I've seen a couple of Westerns. I saw Stagecoach back in college.
Love that movie.
They're all about set pieces, right? They're big spectacles, lots of chases and shootouts and stuff like that. This film feels way more subdued and all about, like you said, building up the tension throughout the entire film. Its gimmick, the told in real time element, really helps to elevate the last shootout. Even though there's not a lot of choreography going on, it still feels like everything's been winding up to this, and it still feels really thrilling.
Yeah, I love the real-time element of it, and I love showing all the clocks and stuff throughout the whole movie. You don't even realize it's happening at first, and then like halfway through the movie, you start realizing, oh, we're like, the clocks are really telling me what's going down, and then it's like 5 minutes till 12, and you're like, ah!
You're like, stop dilly-dallying, get to work, everyone get to work.
Yeah, he starts like writing his will at that point, and you're like, we literally have 5 minutes, bro. Like, I don't know what the plan is right now. But yeah, I mean, I like Westerns a lot. I would never say I'm like a huge Western aficionado or anything, but I've seen quite a few. And we have a couple of very authentic Westerns coming our way. We are going to be watching The Searchers and Once Upon a Time in the West. I mean, Once Upon a Time in the West is until the late 60s, and that's spaghetti Western, so it also is sort of a subversion to a certain extent. But The Searchers is, like, known to be one of the great, like, authentic, sentimental Westerns. So yeah, we'll be able to subvert back. I wouldn't call this a full subversion, though. I mean, it does still follow Western tropes.
Okay.
And it is using the Western genre as a way of communicating its story. I mean, even Stagecoach has so many great characters, and it's really more about the conversation that's going on inside of the coach, and that's considered, one of the greatest Westerns ever made. So I think that that's always been a part of that genre, is that it's about getting to know these characters, and yeah, the shootouts are always great, but I wouldn't call that the whole thing with Westerns.
Well, I also love that the Western leads directly into the samurai genre. Akira Kurosawa has cited John Ford as his favorite director, and you can see the influence in his film, and then you see that come full circle back into Hollywood.
What did you think of the real-time aspect of the movie?
I think that modern filmmakers get fight scenes wrong, and a movie like this sort of proves it, because a fight scene is not thrilling unless you have all the tension winding up and leading up to it. So I love the fact that we're watching in real time. We keep glancing at the clocks. We have it in the back of our mind that things are coming to a head and we don't have that much time left. I'm just trying to highlight the point that the fight means something when you have all of this leading up to it.
Yeah. When
you really take the time to set up the characters, why they matter, what are the stakes? Oh my God, he's going to die, but he's still...
Yes.
Like, I do really think that the last shootout works really well because of everything that leads up to it. And yeah, the real-time aspect is essential for that.
I really like that the film forces the audience to be a part of the countdown. I actually think it's a complete stroke of genius. And I think it's a way of sort of bringing an audience to this certain point of realism. I think it is an attempt to kind of make the audience realize that, we in our country as Americans are running out of time to be dealing with these silly emotions of fear, and that it's time to, start looking at the real problem, which is within our own government. And this might be me overreaching. This might not be what the film is about at all, but that's sort of how I interpret it. It's saying, look, this is, a folklore tale. It's a Western, and this is not happening to you directly, but it is taking place at the same time as you watching it. And therefore, there is this element of realism to it that, I don't know, I think folds into the movie quite nicely.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I love that this film takes place on a Sunday morning when everyone's in church. And it is about, the hour when people are in church.
Yes.
Basically. 10:30 to 11:30.
Yes.
I remember always going to church at that time. And kind of highlighting the hypocrisy. So yeah, I just wanted to get that in there.
I love that he comes to visit the church, and the first thing the preacher says is, "You didn't see it fit to get married in my church." He's like, my wife's a Quaker. I don't know.
Yeah.
The like petty drama between him and the church official. It's like, yeah, that's real. The film has earned its right to just state its thesis out loud at that point, because the characters you've met so far have been so interesting. And so it just throws them all at you by having these random people in a church stand up and say all these, different points of view. And even the people who are on his side, I mean, no one joins him. Even the people on his side are like, he should just get out of here and then we'll all be safer, which isn't even true. Those ruffians are going to come into that town no matter what. They're ignoring the real threat.
I think this is a good time to transition. I want to talk about Gary Cooper.
Okay.
Because he plays the hell out of this role.
Such a good performance.
I thought he was going to come in here. I thought he was going to be the manly man coming in, facing down the bad guys, shooting them dead. John Wayne.
Yes.
His performance and his character, so much better than that. He clearly doesn't like this. It's his duty. He has to do it. He knows it's the right thing to do, but he's scared. Like, straight up, we're watching a man be really scared. And at one point, I think he even breaks down and cries. That was a bizarre thing to see for a movie from the 50s. I didn't expect it. I also think that is a reason why a lot of people connect to this film. The character's going through some real stuff. Okay, so he's clearly old. He's coming in towards the end of his career. Is that right?
Yeah, I think he's in his 50s. He's smoking 2 or 3 packs a day. He's had back issues since he was a kid that have never been looked at officially.
Oh, you can see it.
He's not doing hot. And he needs a hit. He's been in some flops recently, and like people are thinking that his career is about to be over. He does die in 1961, so it's less than a decade away. But yeah, I agree. You can totally see it. He looks so weathered and beaten down. I mean, even for being 50, he just looks so old. I think it plays into the performance really well.
Is the term robbing the cradle?
Because he's marrying Grace Kelly.
Who looks approximately 18?
This is Grace Kelly's second film. This is sort of the movie that launches her Hollywood career before she becomes the Princess of Monaco. She's been in one film before this, and she was noteworthy in it. But this film, so many people did not want to be involved with it because of Carl Foreman, the writer, and other things going on with this film behind the scenes. And Grace Kelly was sort of, it was luck. I mean, she auditioned for the role. She needed a role, and they needed someone to fill the part. And she just does such a great job. You can see it. You can see that she is a movie star. It's crazy to think this is only her second movie because she has such a great presence. Mm-hmm. Just the second you see her during the wedding scene, you're like, oh, wow, that is a Hollywood blonde bombshell. Like, that is like what that is. Like, she looks so good. And yeah, she gives a really great performance, ditches the train and runs off of it while it's going away. It just elates me. I love that sequence so much. You really are like, okay, she is right for him. He made the right choice marrying her. She just struggled just like everybody else does. But in the end, she made the right choice.
And then the other actress, Katy
Jurado, the first Mexican woman to be nominated for an Academy Award. Not for this film, unfortunately. She did win a Golden Globe for this movie. She had been working in Mexican films for a while, I think throughout all of the 40s, and had sort of just broken through to Hollywood. And this is kind of her first major performance in a Hollywood film. And she is just, oh, she's so good in this movie. I love the way she portrays this character. You can tell that she just has a history with this town. You can just read it all on her face that she has just this hatred for this culture that she's sort of forced to participate in. I mean, this is the year that Zapata comes out, such a famous movie where Marlon Brando's just fully in brownface playing a Mexican revolutionary. Even though, as we've discussed in earlier episodes, blackface at this point was already very much a taboo. Unfortunately, when it came to brownface and yellowface, portraying Latin Americans and portraying Asian Americans, that was still kind of a common practice and was not seen as super offensive at this point. So even though the bar is set low, I still think it's wonderful that this movie casts a Mexican actress to play this Mexican woman.
I also like that she shows a little bit more agency than we'd expect from a woman in a film at this time. I mean, we just talked about how last year The Thing from Another World felt like a real step back for the women we're seeing on screen, and this felt like a little bit of a step forward. You know, she's a business owner and she's making decisions on her own that are going against the grain, and she does what she needs to do. She's telling the guys to go screw themselves. Okay, you've mentioned it a couple times that people didn't want to be in this movie, or there's stuff going on behind the scenes, some drama, and it all has to do with the writer, the Red Scare, and the House Un-American Activities Committee in Congress. Do you want to elaborate on that?
So Carl Foreman, he wrote this film, and he said he was a part of the Communist Party in America. I believe it was until the end of World War II, and that he had fallen out with them, that he didn't see any progress happening there. So he was known to be a part of the Communist Party, even before the Red Scare. So he was brought on trial, and they said, "Do you admit to being a communist?" And he said, "I admit to previously being a communist, but I've also more than enough times publicly admitted that I am no longer affiliated with that party and that group." And then they said, "Well, great. We need you to list the names of everybody else who was in that group with you." And he said, "I will not do that." The producer of this film, Stanley Kramer, who independently produced this film, he had done that with a few films previously, really was sort of putting his neck on the line for this project. And then when Carl Foreman, in the middle of all of this, was so complicated to work with, as far as in front of the HUAC board, he felt pressure to distance himself from him because he was scared the film would not be a success. And considering this was his money and his production, you can kind of see why he felt that way. He was a part of this group of people, that, including John Wayne, who sort of allegedly, from different accounts, kind of bum rushed Carl Foreman out of the country. Carl Foreman would move to Britain before this film was even released and lived there for the next 25 years. He would go on to write Bridge on the River Kwai, one of the all-time great spectacle films, an incredible movie. And it won an Oscar, and it wasn't even given to him or in his namesake because his name wasn't attached to the film. And then in the 80s, they gave an honorary Oscar. Unfortunately, it had to be picked up by his widow because he was no longer around. So this guy got kind of screwed over, and it's really sad because through the screenplays we do have from him, he's proven that he's one of the great talents of this time period. I mean, this screenplay alone, every single line seems to delve a little deeper into at least one character, if not multiple characters, and reflects a certain sentiment from the country. I mean, it's just really, really great work. So, yeah, then you watch this movie with that perspective, and it ends with Carl Foreman's stand-in, played by Gary Cooper, stomping on his badge and storming away from the country. At least that's how I interpret it. Yeah, it's very unfortunate. And this is probably a good time to bring up the John Wayne interview.
So I dug up a Playboy interview with John Wayne. It's actually being conducted in the 1970s during the Vietnam War, but he talks a little bit about HUAC, his involvement in the Hollywood Blacklist, and specifically his thoughts on High Noon. And I'll link that in the show notes. It's a long interview, and if you go to page 18, you'll see John Wayne, famous Western actor's thoughts on High Noon. So did you have a chance to read this?
Yes, I read this. And then right afterwards, I mean, he immediately talks about, he says running him out of the country. And then the Playboy interview says, "What gave you the right to run him out of the country?" And then he says, running him out of the country, that's just a figure of speech. But he's not the only person to go on record saying it like that. Kramer said a very similar thing. So it feels like they ran him out of the country.
That's just a figure of speech, Andrew. No.
Yeah, it's just when everyone's using the same figure of speech and it's saying running him out of the country, and then he moved to Britain for 25 years, I find it difficult to not just see it as complete literal, you know?
Earlier in the interview, actually just one page earlier, page 17, the Playboy interviewer is talking about the Motion Picture Alliance formed to blacklist communists and communist sympathizers. And Wayne responds, he says, there was no blacklist, as people said. That's just what the leftists were calling it. We just gave the committee in Congress the facts as we knew them. That's all. The only thing our side did was anywhere near blacklisting was just running a lot of people out of the business. Quote, unquote. Running a lot of people out of the business. That's the only thing that was anywhere near blacklisting. Then what is blacklisting?
Right. It feels like what he's trying to say here, and I'm not defending him, it feels like what he's trying to say in this interview is that he was a part of like a small group that just really didn't like communists. And then when HUAC got involved and started literally blacklisting people, they didn't actually blacklist anyone. They just went to HUAC and told them what they knew, which was just names. And then those people somehow ended up blacklisting. But he and his group of people, they didn't actually do anything. It's like pretty much him saying, oh, I gave names. That doesn't mean I'm like the one who actually blacklisted them. But that's, you know, exactly what that means. So it's a frustrating perspective. But I gotta say, this Playboy interviewer is not giving him any leeway. Every question just feels like a deeper dig. Like right after that, he's like, that sounds worse than blacklisting. Why couldn't you let them just make their art? And then he asks them, like, what made it so fashionable in Hollywood to hate communists? I love the interviewer. He's just digging. And Wayne is giving him everything. He's just giving him everything. He has no apologies at all.
This is a 23-page interview that I definitely want to go through at some point. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here. But there is just a small section on High Noon where John Wayne calls it the most un-American thing he's ever seen.
Which is, I feel like this interview could only exist in the 70s, right? Because at the time, people really did see it as like this all-American movie.
Yeah, super popular. Super popular.
So that's just so funny.
I don't think he wanted Gary Cooper to be in this. He actively tried to get Gary Cooper out of this because he thought it would hurt his career because of all the communism.
Yeah,
this film does not feel communist. It feels anti-Blacklist, anti-HUAC, but any sort of this film is not at all about communism.
Earlier I said it's a dad movie about communism.
Yeah.
That was just a throwaway gag. But
if anything, I do not trust the masses after this film.
Oh, yeah?
No.
They're all just going to ditch you?
Like you said, it's a failing of democracy.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. They all just take him for granted. And that perspective is brought up. Everyone's like, he's done so much to protect us and now we can't join him. But even they don't join him. They're just thinking about that, They're philosophers. It's a really interesting dynamic between our protagonist and the town.
I think that dynamic is made even more interesting when you dig in and see the reception of this film from politicians. This is one of the most popular films amongst American presidents. I don't know if that's a real statistic or not, but apparently Dwight D. Eisenhower loved this film. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And then Ronald Reagan has gone on record saying this is his favorite film. And then you have Bill Clinton screening it in the White House 20 times.
I thought it was, I read 17 screenings or something.
Oh, I'm just adding another 3 because I assume.
Yeah, I read that and was like, what? I just keep screening High Noon. That's all I want to watch. But low-key, if I was ever in a position of so much power and had so much on my shoulders, I would probably pick just one movie and be like, I'm watching this all the time. This is my escape.
Watching Gary Cooper go through this, he feels like a real person, and the weight on his shoulders feels real. I can see why American presidents gravitate towards this film, and I do think it speaks to some sort of American psyche about foreign policy and how you feel when you're running things and you feel like you're taken for granted, but you got to do the right thing even if no one agrees that it's the right thing to do. I mean, okay, but what if the criminal guy was put away on false charges and the marshal is actually the bad guy? You know, the criminal's coming back for some justified revenge. We don't know.
Yeah, it's weird that this film does come across as so anti-blacklist, but also comes across as super pro-death penalty. That's a major part of like the setup, is that those politicians up north didn't have the guts to hang him, so now they're back, and we have all this trouble because the death penalty didn't go through.
Yes, it is a Law and Order film, isn't it? I think they even say that somewhere in there, don't they?
They say this is a Law and Order film into the camera.
Oh, yeah. No, they say something like this town runs on Law and Order or something.
I think you're right. I think that's right. Yeah. I don't know. I can't remember what I was saying. Karl Foreman was done dirty, and yeah, it's unfortunate because as the Playboy interviewer here so astutely states, it just feels like a lot of people weren't able to produce art that probably could have been pretty great just because people were so scared of the Russians and the communists.
It's so strange, too, because we, moving through the years so quickly, it feels like we were just in a time period where, you know, the Russians were our friends.
Yes.
World War II, Russians are our friends. We're fighting the Nazis together. And there was actually a huge campaign to try to get the American public to sympathize with the Soviet Union because we had to. We could go on about the blacklist for a while, but it is just sad because a lot of people got swept into the Communist Party and a decade later suffer the consequences when it becomes unfashionable.
Yep.
Tying it all together with Howard Hawks, he and John Wayne go on to produce Rio Bravo in response to High Noon just a couple years from now, a Western that is the antithesis to this film because they hate communism that much.
Oh my gosh. I've never seen it.
Well, apparently it's about a marshal who refuses the help from the town because they're all a bunch of idiots and knows that he can do it all on his own. He doesn't need their help. And it is that manly man sort of, he's got it. Thank you, but I've got it.
Yeah, I love this movie. And I was very grateful to revisit this. Yeah, it's just really interesting to see like Gary Cooper near the end of his career giving kind of a defining performance. Grace Kelly kicking off her career and Katy Jurado sort of being able to make this international success happen. Yeah, it's worth watching just because the three of their paths intersecting here is so good and they all give such good work in it.
Yeah, I really liked this movie too. I enjoyed it and I'm really happy with how well it intersected with everything going on in Hollywood and in politics and public sentiment. I don't know. Feels like a great film to watch for 1952.
You know, I mean, there's some effect work near the end, but we've really been watching some big movies recently as far as their scope and their ambition. And I really liked getting to watch this smaller film that's got a very small cast. And it was a nice little relaxation, you know?
Yeah, before we dive into some really hard stuff for next week.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man.
Get your tissues ready.
Yeah.
Break out your tissues. It's Tokyo Story from Yasujiro Ozu.
You can find where to watch Tokyo Story in the show notes, as always. Oh, I have so much good stuff about Ozu for a podcast. I'm excited.
Japanese cinema's taken off at this point. You know, you got Kurosawa, Ozu. Some really great filmmakers coming out of post-war Japan. I've heard that Tokyo Story is one of the best directed films ever. I have been waiting years to see this film. It's just long. I haven't gotten to it. It's not even that long, really. A little over 2 hours.
That's 2 hours 20, if memory serves.
Yeah, 2 hours 20. So about the same, or no, a little bit shorter than Batman v Superman.
Oh my god.
I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.